Okay. So last time we talked about the coral polyp, right? And the coral polyp is the animal that actually builds the reef. And so we have our teeny tiny little coral polyps that build their skeleton and form colonies. Okay, and in a colony you have a bunch of different single animals that live together, and stay interconnected. And what two systems stay connected in the colony? Coral colony.
Polyp.
The polyps do, the nervous system and the
Digestive system.
Okay. All right. So how do you take these teeny tiny little animals called the coral polyp that form these colonies and form an entire huge reef like the Great Barrier Reef that you can see from space? Well, you've got this process called reef formation that allows for you to get these big structures that we know as reefs. Okay, and in that formation, you have two phases. Okay, you have the constructive phase, and then you have what's called the bioerosion phase. So it's basically to form a reef, you have to build it up, but you also need to tear it down. So reef formation goes through a process of like tearing it down and building it up, then tearing it down and building it up. All right, so you've got bioerosion and the constructive phase. The first phase is the bioerosion phase. So you've got lovely little coral colonies, okay, that are growing. And you've got all sorts of like boring sponges and clams and stuff that burrow into the base of the coral. Okay, that's where they live. So they burrow into the base of the coral and weaken it. And then when storms come, okay, these coral colonies fall over because they are weakened at the base. All right, so they fall over, and this continues to get broken down. All right, so it keeps getting broken into pieces, and it starts filling in all of the spaces with sand that gets deposited on it. Also some like sorts of like shells, like mollusk shells and stuff like that, fill in the cracks. And then you get green algae, or coralline algae that grows over the surface. Okay, so you basically break this down, fill in the cracks, and then cover it over with coralline algae. Okay, and coralline algae, if you remember, is an algae that has calcium carbonate in its cell walls, which means that it's like crusty, it's like crunchy, hard. Okay, and that coralline algae grows over the surface and basically glues all of those pieces together, cements them all together. Okay, and because coralline algae is tough, okay, it forms a new hard surface, new little coral larva comes and grows, settles down, and starts to grow into a colony, gets eroded, breaks down, forms another layer, okay? Another little coral colony comes, settles down, forms another layer, right? And so you get layer upon layer upon layer building up of dead coral, with new coral growing on top of dead coral. Does that make sense? Okay, so the bioerosion phase is the actual breaking down of the coral, and then the constructive phase is when that new little coral larva settles down and becomes a new colony. All right? So here's the pictures to help you see it. So here's your coral colony up here at the top, and you've got the sponges and the worms and stuff that are burrowing into the base. Waves come, breaks down. Okay, you've got all sorts of, it keeps breaking down, all sorts of stuff filling in the cracks. Right, shells filling in the cracks, and the algae growing over the top. And then you've got your little coral larva settling down and forming new colonies. See that? And so you get layer upon layer upon layer, and you get this big giant structure. All right, so all of the living corals growing on top of the dead coral. Yeah? Okay. All right, so the coral colony and the coral animal itself is what is doing most of the building of the coral reef. However, you don't really get a coral reef without some other types of things like the coralline algae. So the coralline algae is the glue that holds the entire reef together. And without it, you don't get a reef. Okay? So you need that coralline algae to grow and to hold the whole reef together. So the algae is super important. Okay, so coral reef growth is dependent on how fast the coral colonies themselves can grow. And the coral colonies growth rate is all about how much skeleton that they can lay down. right? It's all about calcium carbonate deposition. That's their skeleton. So these little pieces that I was passing around that you could look at, this is the skeleton. So how fast they grow is based on how much of this they can produce and how fast. All right. So this is what they're trying to do, form the skeleton. And there's a bunch of different things that will affect how fast they're able to form that skeleton. One of the things is light. So if you do not have the so remember you have zooxanthellae that live inside their tissues, right? That are algae that give them most of their food. And those zooxanthellae need light to give them their food. So if they live in a place where they don't get much light, zooxanthellae can't produce much food, and the coral colony can't grow very fast. Right? So the amount of light that they get will determine how fast those coral colonies can grow. The more light they have, the faster they can grow. The species of colony will also determine how fast they can grow. So branching corals grow much quicker than like massive corals, which are the big like round brain corals. So these types of corals will grow much faster. So again, just depends on the type of coral that you're actually looking at. Biological interactions. So corals compete for space on the reef. So a place to settle down and attach is like at a premium on a reef. Like you really, really need a spot to settle down. So corals will actually compete for space. So if you have like two species of corals that are growing right next to each other, okay, and this coral is like overgrowing this coral and it's blocking its light, and then this one is like going to go on the offensive and like try and defend itself, it can actually release its mesenteric filaments and dissolve the coral here next to it to try and like get it to stop growing over it. And so this coral colony will have to like put more energy into like repairing this spot, and it'll slow down the rate at which it grows, right? And so hopefully this one will get the chance to like catch up, right? So if it lives in a place where it's constantly like battling on all sides for space, then it'll have to put more energy into repairing itself than to growing quickly. Yes? Okay. Then the temperature will also affect it, right? So corals need warm water, greater than 20 degrees Celsius, but they can't have too warm of water. If it gets too warm, then they'll undergo what's called bleaching. Okay, and bleaching is when they just expel their zooxanthellae. So the zooxanthellae actually gives them their color. So if they get rid of that zooxanthellae, they look white because you can see the white skeleton underneath. So we call it bleaching, like we took your clothes and put it in bleach, right? So it's called bleaching. And so they don't grow very fast because they don't have their food source, right? Which is the zooxanthellae. Okay, wave exposure is also going to affect the rate at which the colony can grow. If they live in a place where there's tons and tons of waves just like pounding on them, they're going to have to put a lot more energy into like bulking up their skeleton to withstand those waves than they are into growing really quickly. Okay, so all of these things affect how fast a coral colony can grow, which affects the growth of the reef. These are the different kinds of corals. So you've got your plate coral. This is encrusting, so grows over surfaces. Fallacious corals, columnar, branching, massive, and the free living. This one, so the massive ones, like the brain coral on the right, those are probably the most slow growing, just because they're just big balls, basically. So they have to take a long time to grow. Here's actual pictures of the different corals. So massive corals, branching, fallacious, and the columnar. Right?
You have to know the four types.
Okay, and so here's the encrusting coral, the free living, and then the plate-like coral. This one right here, this is a free living coral. This is what it looks like when it's alive. Right, so you can see the mouth is in the middle, and then you've got all the tentacles around the outside. All right, so that's what this would look like if it was alive. Hello. Okay, bleaching. So El Nino causes bleaching in corals. Okay. So El Nino is basically events that happens where warm water comes to places where it normally doesn't come, and it's warmer than usual. So El Nino actually causes bleaching in coral and can actually kill some corals. Typically, though, most corals recover after El Nino passes and they reuptake their zooxanthellae and they're fine. However, they can die from bleaching. All right, so here's basically what happens. So you can see the skeleton here, okay, and then the little coral polyps that live on the surface. Yeah, see that? Okay, and then the little dots in there represent the zooxanthellae. So that's normal coral there on the left. On the right is what happens in bleaching. So you still have the skeleton, okay, and you still have the little coral polyps, but they've spit out their zooxanthellae. And you think, like, that doesn't make any sense. If they are stressed out because the water is too warm, you wouldn't think like, oh, let me get rid of my major source of food. That would help me be less stressed out. That seems logical, right? That doesn't make sense. Well, we don't really know why they do it, but we think that they probably do it because some zooxanthellae is better, like it's more heat resistant than others, and so we think they try and pick out their old zooxanthellae and uptake new ones that are maybe more heat tolerant, and so that helps them to survive better. But that's just a theory. We don't actually know that. So, but we think that's what's going on. Here's pictures of coral. Like this is live coral on the left with its zooxanthellae, and then the bleached coral on the right that's alive. And so you can see why it's called bleaching, right? It loses its color. This is still alive. However, if they remain bleached for too long, they die. So they need to have their zooxanthellae to survive. Okay, locations on the reef. Just like you have different locations on the continental shelf and the break and the slope and the rise, okay, you have different locations on the reef. So the forereef is the part that is closest or facing the open ocean, deep water, right? And the forereef is where you're going to get a lot of surf. So waves are going to be affecting the forereef quite a bit. The reef crest is kind of like a shelf break. So remember how we had the continental shelf and then the continental slope, and the point where the shelf became the slope was the continental or the shelf break. The reef crest is equivalent to that. Okay, so it's where you change from the forereef to the reef flat. And the reef crest, that's where most of the waves actually break. Okay, so the reef crest gets pounded with waves. All right. The reef flat. The reef flat is pretty much flat, and it has some wave action, but not much. And it can actually be exposed during low tide, so it can be in a tide. But typically that only occurs during super low tides, during spring tides. The back reef is facing the land and has lots and lots of different animals that live there because there's not a lot of wave action, and so the corals grow really, really well, and the animals don't really have to hang on, and so they have tons and tons of things that live on the back reef. And then you can have the lagoon. The lagoon is separates the reef from the land. Shallow water. You can have seagrass beds that grow here, very, very low wave action, and so other things can live in the lagoon. Right? Good? So here's a picture to help you kind of see the different parts on the reef. So this right here, okay, this is the forereef, right? And then here's your reef crest, okay? This is your reef flat, the back reef, and then there's your lagoon. All right, so those are the different places on the reef. The pictures of the coral, okay, these are the same species of coral, but just they have different skeletons based on where they are on the reef, okay, because of the wave energy. So remember how we were talking about waves affecting coral growth? Here's what happens. So reef crest, that's where you have the most energy, right? All of the waves breaking. So look at the skeleton of this coral there. Super big and bulky, right? The back reef, okay, and the lagoon, these two, very, very delicate branching. There's not much wave energy here, so they don't have to be big and bulky to withstand the waves. So very, very branching and delicate looking. Again, the fore reef, okay, has lots of wave action. So, and particularly up top of the fore reef as opposed to down deeper. And so you can see again the effect of the waves on the coral. Does that make sense? Okay. Also on the fore reef, you have different kinds of coral that you find as you go down. So you can see that here. You actually find encrusting corals up here close to the reef crest. And then below that you have branching corals. And you have branching corals there as opposed to like massive coral because branching corals need lots of sunlight because they grow quickly, so they have to be up closer to the surface of the water. But you would think like the massive corals should be up higher because they could withstand more wave energy, but they can live with less light. So they're found a little bit deeper. And then below the massive corals, you have the fallacious or plate-like, and that's because they grow out and can capture lots of sunlight. So that's like, as you go deeper on the reef, those are the types of corals you would find on the fore reef, so you should probably know those. So. Okay. 3 kinds of reefs. We have 3 kinds of reefs that you can have. You have a fringing reef, a barrier reef, and an atoll. So, this is a fringing reef, okay, this is an atoll, and that's a barrier reef, right? Okay, so let's look at the 3 types of reefs. The first type of reef is a fringing reef. And fringing reefs grow right offshore. So this is like in Hawaii where you can just like walk out into the water and you're on a reef. That's a fringing reef. So they directly border the land, and you can walk right out onto like the reef flat and you're there. They do not have a lagoon because they are not separated from land. All right, so no lagoon, and walk directly out onto the reef. This is what we the youngest type of reef, and just keep that in the back of your mind because I'll explain what that means in a little bit. So, so here's like what it would be like. Okay, so you've got the land here, right? And then you walk out into the water, okay, and you walk basically onto the flat, and you've got reef cuts in the fore reef. There's no lagoon in between. And again, another picture, better than I can draw. Okay, barrier reef. You have the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. It's called a barrier reef because that's the type of reef it is. Super complicated, I know. So, barrier reefs are not found directly offshore. They are found separated from land by a lagoon, so they're found a little bit further offshore. And they are the second stage of reef formation. So if I were to ask you to draw a profile of a barrier reef, this is probably what I would be asking for. Okay, so you've got your lagoon right here, right? The back reef, the reef flat, the reef crest, and then the fore reef. I would probably draw that. You probably know it. Okay. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention too. Fringing reefs are the type of reef that is the most affected by human activities because you can just walk out right onto them, right? And any sort of runoff can cause problems on the reef. So fringing reefs are the most affected by human activity. You should probably know that too. Flat. So you have the lagoon, the back reef, the reef flat, the reef crest, and the fore reef. Okay. Another picture. Okay. Barrier reefs on the fore reef slope, you can have these unusual formations called spur and groove formations. And basically it alternates on the fore reef slope between like having an outgrowth of coral, which is the spur, and then like a channel of sand, which is the groove, and then an outgrowth of coral and and a channel of sand. And basically, those channels of sand, they're there to kind of funnel any of the sand and sediment that gets on the top of the reef down to the sea floor. Because if that blocks the sun, what's going to happen to the coral?
No, it won't grow.
It won't grow, right? So if it won't grow, you need to get rid of it. So you have little channels that it slides down to the sea floor and gets rid of all the sediment that would settle on top of the coral. So it's a good thing. Here's what it looks like from the air. So you can see the little boat right here, yeah? Okay, to give you kind of a perspective on how big they are. So this right here would be a spur. That's where the coral is actually growing. See the light part right there? That's the groove. That's where the sand runs down. We got like the spur and the groove, right? Alternates back and forth. See that? Okay. Atolls. Atolls are the last stage of reef formation, and these are circular reefs that we found out in basically in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So coral reefs are typically found close to shore, okay, because they need a place where they can attach to the bottom to a hard surface, and they need to be in a place where they can get sunlight. And so that typically happens close to shore, okay? And so we found these reefs out in the middle of the ocean that are these round reefs, and we're like, what the heck? How did these get here? Like, we were super confused. And Darwin was actually the first one who proposed the theory for how these formed. He was right on this. Maybe not on some other stuff, but right on this. Okay, so here's basically what happens. Volcanic island forms in the middle of the ocean, okay, and comes up above the surface. And so now you've got island, right? Volcano stops, and you form a fringing reef around the outside of that island, right? So because you now have a shallow spot and a hard surface for the coral to attach to, so they attach, they grow as a fringing reef. The volcano stops, you're exposed to lots of waves and stuff, and the island starts to erode and break down. As the island erodes and breaks down, it gets smaller. The reef stays in the same spot, okay, and so now what you have is a barrier reef. So now you have land, but it's separated from the land by a lagoon. You keep getting erosion happening, the island completely disappears under the surface of the water, and what you're left with is a circular reef in the middle of the ocean, called an atoll. Right? So that's what we mean by like first stage, second stage, third stage of reef formation. My animation doesn't work. This was supposed to form a fringing reef, and then the island was supposed to go away. I'm supposed to have an atoll, but it doesn't work. It's annoying. So here's your island, form a fringing reef, okay, and then the island erodes, and you're left with.
So it's like the inside of a
Yeah, basically, like the lagoon in the middle is basically like what the inside of the volcano is. It's pretty cool, and you can have like this could be deep or it could be pretty shallow, and then you've got like out here on the like 4-meter slope out here, it could be thousands of feet deep because it comes up from the seafloor. So here could be a couple 100 feet deep and then thousands of feet deep. So pretty cool, kind of awesome. But basically for these, you've got a 4-meter slope that goes all the way around, okay, and then a lagoon in the middle. So kind of circular shape.